In 1898, you could walk into a pharmacy and buy heroin, over the counter, for your child's cough. And it was made by Bayer, the same company that makes your aspirin today. For most of modern history, the most dangerous drugs on Earth weren't hidden in alleyways. They were on pharmacy shelves, advertised proudly, recommended by doctors, given to children. These are the drugs the world once sold without a second thought, until it was far too late. Heroin, the children's cough medicine. In 1898, the German company Bayer began selling heroin as a cough and pain medicine. Their pitch: a powerful, safe, non-addictive alternative to morphine. The name itself came from the German word heroisch, because of how strong and effective it made patients feel. It was sold all over the world, including in cough syrups designed for children. Parents spooned it to their kids to calm a cough and help them sleep. It worked beautifully. It also turned out to be one of the most addictive substances ever created. It took over a decade for the world to admit the disaster. By the 1910s, heroin addiction was everywhere, and country after country banned it. But Bayer had already sold it across the planet. Cocaine, the miracle cure doctors put in everything. In the late 1800s, cocaine wasn't a street drug. It was a medical miracle. It killed pain, erased fatigue, and lifted your mood. Doctors prescribed it for almost everything. Sigmund Freud, the founder of modern psychology, was a devoted user. He wrote glowing papers about it and pressed it on his friends and patients alike. There were even cocaine drops sold for children's toothaches. The advertisements showed happy kids at play and promised instant relief. And the most famous product of all: when Coca-Cola was invented in 1886, it contained real cocaine from the coca leaf, sold as a refreshing tonic that gave you a gentle lift. Cocaine stayed in the recipe until 1903, when the company quietly swapped it out, replacing the lift with heavier doses of sugar and caffeine instead. By the 1920s, the mood had flipped completely, and cocaine was banned across the world. But for nearly 50 years, it had been one of medicine's most trusted tools. Laudanum, the opium drops they gave to babies. Laudanum was opium dissolved in alcohol, and for centuries it was the most common painkiller on Earth. Sold in any shop to anyone, no prescription required. People took it for everything: pain, anxiety, sleeplessness, a cough, even just a gloomy day. It was cheap, legal, and sitting in millions of homes. But its most disturbing use was on the very young. Exhausted parents used opium syrups to silence crying and teething babies. One product, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, was sold for teething infants and laced with morphine. It stayed on shelves for over 60 years. It did quiet the babies, sometimes forever. It eventually earned a grim nickname, the baby killer. It wasn't until the early 1900s that the law even required these products to list what was inside. Until then, parents had no idea they were dosing their children with opium. Methamphetamine, the pill for housewives, soldiers, and dieters. Methamphetamine hit the market in the 1930s and 40s, sold as a cheerful little pill for energy, focus, and weight loss. Doctors handed it to housewives for low mood and exhaustion. Dieters took it to kill their appetite. It was sold as a modern miracle for ordinary life. In World War II, militaries on every side fed it to soldiers and pilots to keep them awake, alert, and aggressive. Tens of millions of doses were handed out. After the war, Japan dumped its massive military surplus onto the public. Sold openly in shops, it sparked the country's first nationwide drug epidemic. It took decades to rein in. Today, meth is one of the most feared drugs on the planet. Once, it was just the pill you took to get through a Tuesday. Amphetamine inhalers, the legal speed sold at every drugstore. In 1933, a company released the Benzedrine inhaler to clear a stuffy nose. Inside the harmless little tube was a strip soaked in pure amphetamine. People quickly figured out that if you cracked it open and swallowed the strip, you got a massive jolt of stimulant. A legal, cheap high on every pharmacy shelf. Students used it to cram. Truckers used it to drive through the night. Writers and musicians ran on it. It quietly powered an entire generation's all-nighters. It sat on open shelves with zero restrictions for decades. Not until the 1950s and 60s did governments finally close the inhaler loophole. Quaaludes, the legal sedative that became the biggest party drug of its time. In the 1960s and 70s, Quaaludes were prescribed as a perfectly safe sedative and sleeping pill. Doctors gave them out freely for stress and insomnia. They were sold as non-addictive. They were not. People discovered that fighting off the drowsiness produced a warm, euphoric, deeply disinhibited high. Quaaludes swept through the party and disco scene. Whole clubs ran on them. They became one of the defining recreational drugs of the 70s. By the early 1980s, the scale of the abuse was impossible to ignore, and they were banned almost overnight. From a doctor's prescription to an outlawed drug in a heartbeat. Heroin for coughs, cocaine for children, opium for babies, meth for housewives, speed at the drugstore, sedatives on the dance floor. Every single one was legal, sold by trusted companies, blessed by doctors. The line between medicine and poison was drawn slowly, painfully, and almost always too late. Which makes you wonder, which of the things we swallow today without a second thought will end up on a list exactly like this one? If that was as wild to you as it was to me, leave a like and subscribe. It really does help the channel, and there's a lot more history like this on the way.